Hello out there. I'm Chris Bisha, editor-in-chief of 360degreesound.com. 360 has a long-running series on one-hit wonders. Now, to qualify as a 360-degree sound one-hitter, an artist has to have charted once and only once in their career on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100. I'd like to welcome my colleague, Austin Bureau Chief David Hopper, our one-hit wonders expert, as well as our guest, 90s expert, Phil Childers. Welcome, guys. Glad to have you here.
Good to be on.
Thanks for
All
having
right.
me.
So, in this episode, we turn our one hit focus to the year 1994. In 1994, we were firmly into the Clinton era. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, had been implemented, and Paula Jones had filed a sexual harassment suit against the president. Figure skater Tanya Harding had her rival Nancy Kerrigan galoolied ahead of the 1994 Winter Olympics in Lillehammer, Norway. And a low-speed chase captivated the nation as O.J. Simpson's white Bronco led the California Highway Patrol on a tour of Southern California freeways. The top-grossing movies of 1994 were The Lion King, Forrest Gump, and True Lies. And I want to remind everybody what the top five singles were on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100 at the end of the year 1994. The Sign by Ace of Base was number one. I Swear by All for One was number two. I'll Make Love to You by Boys to Men was number three. The Power of Love, not unfortunately by my boy Huey Lewis, but by Celine Dion, was number four. And Hero by Mariah Carey came in at number five for the year 1994. So while there were 21 hitters in 1994, we're focusing on the seven songs that made our list, primarily dance and hip hop tracks. And honestly, I didn't recognize a lot of these artists when we were going through the list, but I sure recognized the tracks from spending way too much time in the clubs back in the day. So we're going to take them one at a time in the order of their the date of their chart peak. And we're going to start with Culture Beat and their single Mr. Vain, which peaked on January 22nd at number 17. Now, this is a great example of my reaction to this list. I was like, who the hell is Culture Beat? Until I heard the overpowering opening keyboard riff and that classic four on the floor house thump. How about that, David?
Yeah, a classic of the Eurodance genre, which was huge in the 90s. Particularly early to mid 90s. Going to briefly show some CDs here of very similar artists. We had La Bouche, Le Click, Real McCoy, and last but not least, Hadaway, who made our 1993 One Hit Wonders list with his classic "What Is Love." So yeah, basically, if you've heard one song, you've heard them all, but they're a lot of fun. And Mr. Vane is definitely a standout of the Eurodance genre. Do you remember that culture? Did you remember that Culture Beat song, Phil?
Oh, I very much remembered it. And for all four of those CDs that you lifted up there are all much better than Mr. Vane in my book.
Yeah.
Those are all good tracks. Some of the Mr. Vane, you just could not get away from it. You heard it all the time. I was already an aging club kid at that point. So when that came out, I was kind of like, uh, everything is going to shit. But I did, obviously I still hum it. I asked my wife about it. She immediately sang the chorus and the beginning to it, and she's 40 years old. So it's obviously it's put a stamp on, popular culture.
You could put a tramp stamp on popular culture.
It is 94. I'm sure they're on their way down. I don't
Yeah, maybe
know.
a couple dolphins swimming or, angel
Butterfly,
wings,
take your choice.
something like that. All right, and then our next one hitter from 1994 is Us Three with their track Cantaloop, Flip Fantasia, which peaked at number nine on March 5th. And here we have the jazzy side of hip hop. Jazz rap did have a moment, and I love the interplay of jazz instrumentation and old school rap style on this track. So, David, why is this track called Cantaloop?
I believe it's called that because it samples Herbie Hancock's Cantaloop. I think it's the title from one of his '60s Blue Note Records recordings, and that's what's so cool about the album Hand on the Torch. Us three is that they basically had access to the Blue Note catalog. I think it was owned by Capitol Records at the time, and so there's about a dozen different samples from classic Blue Note jazz recordings, which is a label that started in like the late '30s, but really had its heyday in like the '50s and '60s with hard bop, Herbie Hancock, Art Blakey, uh, Donald Byrd, Donald Byrd. The list goes on, but yeah, just a really great mix of hip hop and jazz. And it was cool that that was so big in the, I'd say around 93, 94. I have a few others here. Guru, Jazzmatazz, another classic of the genre. Guru was the MC of Gangstar. And then we had some groups that maybe not as explicitly jazz rap, but had a lot of jazz samples, and that would be like Pete Rock and CL Smooth. And then also, of course, Tribe Called Quest, Midnight Marauders, which just came out in 1993. So yeah, what did you make of the jazz rap that was popular and that particular us three
I was
track?
I was a huge fan.
Yeah,
So at that time for myself, growing up, I always say rap is my rock and roll as an 80s kid. That is the music that was brand new. And so to see it go through its different phases and kind of really becoming tired of gangster rap at that time, as even as smooth as Snoop was and how much we loved him, it was nice, it was refreshing to have other music going on. And, someone like Blue Note, who was starting to have challenges, my understanding, with a lot of the New York, like Guru and Jazzmatazz and, Gangstar, that whole genre there were conversations already starting to go on about, the sampling laws at the time, the different rules, but also creating, jazz as more accessible at a time that maybe it had been waning in popularity with all of this other music for young folks at the time. So no, that was very, and I believe that there is some type of actual like association as well between us three and maybe they're being signed by Blue Note, but I know that they gave them lots of permission for all of those samples as you talked about earlier.
yeah,
So no, maybe as popular as it is and as catchy as it is, I still think it's a great example of the music. Gangstar and Jazzmatazz and Guru is the pinnacle for anybody who is actually like a hip hop head when it comes to the jazz rap fusion. But Us Three is definitely the accessible entry song for that genre.
yeah, for sure. And the Us Three album was released. It was released on Blue Note Records.
Okay,
It was
yeah.
cool, and it went gold. So it sold over 500,000 copies. You can easily find the CDs in a lot of dollar bins nowadays. So
Yeah,
it's a great
because
pickup.
that is, and I believe that they are, then, if you're confirming that for me, I believe they are the first rap act of only a handful that were signed to Blue Note.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's great that Blue Note got in the mix with hip hop. Kind of surprising. That was news to me. But next up is Masta Ace Incorporated with Born to Roll. I had no idea what this track was. It peaked at number 23 on May 7th, 1994. And I was just like, check it out, baby. Check it out, y'all. I got nothing on this. Zero recall. Take it, David.
Oh, well, it was a song I had heard before, but wasn't too familiar with. But I mean, I think it was probably an unlikely hit because Masta Ace was a respected kind of underground rapper. He had been around for some years, but that was kind of like his short-lived collective. And yeah, one of the things I noted when I was listening is like it's kind of felt like a mix of like the East Coast lyricism with like the West Coast bass and beats. It's got a really fat like synth bass track, and he's clearly a talented MC, kind of rapid fire style rap. And yeah, I think any fan of classic hip hop would enjoy it. You remember
Well,
that song, Bill?
Well, when I listened to it, I definitely remembered it. And the first thing that it cued or, kind of brought to my mind was that even at that time, it reminded me a lot of Sir Mix-a-Lot being the Northwest hip hop based sound and the Swass album on My Posse on Broadway, because actually, when you listen to it, the distorted bass sound versus like the actual rhythm of it sounds very similar to that.
Mm.
So I'm definitely a fan of that one as a, one-off and also very similar,
Mm.
to other hip hop that I like. Again, I love the first or that Swass album by Sir Mix-a-Lot. Anyone who hasn't listened to it, it's definitely worth a listen. And if
Yeah,
you
it's
like hip,
great. Yeah, that's great, man. Even though I wasn't familiar with it, it took me back to that period
oh
in the
yes.
'90s when hip hop was really on the rise. Um, so the next track is by M People. It's called "Moving On Up," and that peaked on June 25th, 1994, at number 34. I love the line, "Take it like a man, baby, if that's what you are." That line kills me, man. And I love the heavy sax in the groove. And it's a super strong vocal, don't you think, David?
Yes, this is a song I didn't know. I just came across it in my research. I think it peaked at, yeah, you said 34. So it just
Oh yeah.
barely made the top 40 in the US. They were a British group. They had like 20 hits in the 90s, like top 40 hits in the UK. So they were a lot bigger group there. But kind of interesting that it was started by Mike Pickering, this DJ who was also an A&R man with Factory Records, and he signed like I think Happy Mondays, which were huge on the Manchester scene, and also I believe the band James. So this was his project with the singer and a band member from Orange Juice who had some hits in the '80s, early '80s. So yeah, it's just a really fun dance track, and I love the sax groove as well. Did you remember this one, Phil?
I did, and this is one that, oddly enough, for all the great things that you just talked about, this is another one where I'm like, this was not my jam. I love James, I love Factory Records, I love Happy Mondays. I do not like this for whatever reason. I think the vocals for me grind me for some reason. And this is just one of those I'm like, I don't know. This just doesn't, this one didn't, this one triggered me slightly because I was like, oh, I remember this. I do not like this. But again, it's interesting to, when you talk about somebody like that from Factory Records, what was going on in the 90s, the different sounds that were going on and where people were trying to put their hands and what they were trying to do, kind of to single themselves out or single out other artists within kind of a complicated decade.
Yeah,
Cool.
it almost kind of sounds like a Eurodance track in a way. And I
Yeah,
think another thing that was big then was what they called it, acid jazz, which was kind of like
yeah.
really, I guess maybe us three could kind of fall in that as well. But yeah, so it was kind of definitely reflective of what was hot at the time.
Yeah, I like my house music with less, and less vocals than
Yeah.
that, or the ability to mix, because that song to me kind of reminds me of kind of a house track that just there's no in and out, nobody is mixing through it. There are no other songs coming in, and the vocals opposed to the beat, where it gives you an opportunity to dance when you're out there. If you're a club kid like I was, that gave you okay, pumped it up before everyone kind of did the trance type thing. It was that house type of beat that would go on and then there would be a break and you could take a breath or whatever it was going to be. But this song, again, with the repetition, too much for me.
Well, we weren't all rolling on ecstasy in the '90s, Phil.
Oddly enough, not me either.
Well,
Well,
all
should
right,
have been, but didn't.
let's move on to a really fun one. Ahmad with "Back in the Day," which peaked on August 6th, 1994, at number 26. And this is a damn fine example of West Coast hip hop to me, man. Back in the day, resets like every style trend in hip hop culture. And what do you find notable about this track, David?
Well, definitely the I believe it was the remix that was the hit, and that remix sampled Teddy Pendergrass's Philly Soul classic "Love TKO," which is like a perfect bass line for a kind of smooth, cool West Coast hip hop song. So I love that. But also, what was notable, and I just found this out from my research, but he was only 18 years old when he wrote the song and recorded it. So it's kind of funny that he's reflecting on being a kid when he's only 18. And, it's very vivid, the details of like, the fashions and the girls and all the different things growing up.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. As again a kid of the 80s, and this is 1994, he's 18. I was 18 in 1991. So, definitely paints a picture for myself of someone who grew up, in more of a cityscape in Detroit. You know, the biker short comment and all the different comments on the fashion, the styles, what was going on, what he remembered. It was, I love that track. That's about it.
It's really fun. Watching the video took me back, and it was
Yes.
just super chill, you know. And he's got a couple different voices that he uses, so that's really cool. Now, changing gears a little bit for the next one was Candlebox, with their hit "Far Behind," which peaked on October 1st, 1994, at number 18. Record labels and FM radio had finally embraced indie rock in the 90s, and they branded it alternative. And this track seems to be sent direct from Grunge Central Casting to me. And it got played a ton. I didn't really dig it, and I got sick as hell of it. And I never knew it charted this high, number 18. That's amazing to me.
Yeah, it was their yeah, they're only one to hit the top 40 of the pop chart. However, they've had a number to hit the Billboard rock charts, and I think that album, which was their debut, the it probably had like four singles that were on the rock charts. But yeah, Far Behind was definitely the biggest. And I read that where the singer said in interviews where it was a tribute to the was it Andy Wood, the singer, the
Andrew
singer
Wood.
or Andrew Wood, yeah, singer of Mother Love Bone, who died in a overdose. But yeah, I mean, I remember hearing this like on the radio, even in the late '90s on alt rock radio. So it was played to death. And yeah, I'll admit I in part included it to have a little more variety. I wanted to include a rock track, but a lot of people love it, and they just wrapped up their farewell tour pretty recently. What did you think of this one, Phil?
I'm going to lean with Chris on this one. This is another challenging grunge song, or they should call that, I don't know, pop grunge, post grunge, whatever you want to call it, on the way out grunge,
Yeah.
of that time. But I have a soft spot for some of these songs. My dad held on. I introduced my dad to, alternative stations of the time. I moved on and he still hung around a lot. So there was, a lot of bands that he ended up liking were bands that I disliked after introducing him to bands that I did like through alternative radio at the time. So Candlebox ranks up there for, a dad hit for me at this point versus, anything I truly enjoyed. But, again, it's a great pop grunge song. It's got, all the elements are there. And actually, there was from a Detroit standpoint, there, Mike Leslie uh, recently was part of Candlebox's touring band, and he's a local musician around here as well. I don't think he was in this last incarnation of the final tour, but, through the pre-pandemic years, local Michigan musician. When he told me, I have to be honest, I was like, yeah, cool guy. Not
Good for
impressed by the
you.
Candlebox part, but nice guy,
Yeah,
good musician.
right. Yeah, so yeah, it does have a pretty big dad rock vibe, kind of like Creed or whatever at this
Oh yeah.
point, like out in the backyard raking leaves with this jamming out on your Bluetooth speaker or something.
Sure.
But yeah, their final one-hit wonder that made it to our list is Aini Kamoze, and his number one hit, "Here Comes the Hot Stepper," which peaked at number one on December 17th, 1994. And the video for this song reminded me that it was also included in the soundtrack of Robert Altman's film Pret-a-Porter. The song features a strong dancehall influence. What can you tell us about Aini Kamoze, David?
Well, this song, of course, came out in '94, but interestingly, he had been on the reggae scene for a while, and this is actually his debut album from 1984 that was released on Island Records. It's a classic, and I thought I'd read a little bit of the liner notes because it gives a little introduction to him. Says he started singing from the minute he was born, while other babies cry. Visioned Rastafari in 1976. Pencil Slim, freed, single, and disentangled. A 6 foot vegetarian, believing that all food should be eaten live, uncooked. Uh, Any Kamoze Ini Kamoze cools out in the hill around Spanish Town. Well, what else do you want to know? So there's a little intro on Ini Kamoze, but this is a classic you got to pick up. It was produced by Sly and Robbie, the legendary reggae rhythm section. And so yeah, Here Comes the Hotstepper is a fusion of hip hop and reggae, really more of a hip hop track I'd say than reggae, but and it's got some dance hall elements. I mean, I think it's a banger. I love it. It's a little cheesy, but it's a fun song. I'm sure you.
I know it's Phil's jam, so I'm going to cut you off
It
there,
is my
David,
jam.
and hand it over to Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the things that you talked about there again hit on all the notes for me. The Pret-a-Porter, that's actually when I was first exposed to the song itself. And I think it's on I can't remember at this point if it's kind of during the credits at the end when it goes on, but I remember talking about this made me remember the date I was on. I remember going to see the movie, all the things, and no, this is my jam. I can't get enough. I have listened to all, and it did bring me down the rabbit hole even when I was much younger to figure out what was going on with Ina Kamoze at the time, and listen to those other tracks. I had a very long commute, and reggae was what got me through it. So I was always looking for tracks to listen to. When you're driving an hour and a half one way, hour and a half another in traffic, reggae and dance hall can take you on a journey that's can get you through terrible traffic. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, for sure. It's infectious. I mean, I didn't. I mean, I remembered it once I heard it, but I listened to it like a bunch of times
Oh yeah,
after I put it out. I was like,
the amount
yeah,
of commercials. It's in a ton of commercials too over the
is it?
years. Every time I hear it, I'm like, oh yeah,
That's
Yeah,
cool.
it's just like a series of hooks. It's so catchy, and
Yes.
he even works in like the na 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 from Land of a Thousand Dances, and yeah, it's a classic.
Yeah, definitely a must hear if you haven't heard it, and grab a recording on a physical format of it if you don't have a copy. There were other one-hit wonders, as we talked about. There were 20 during 1994, and a couple notable tracks were Beck's "Loser" and Offspring's "Come Out and Play," as well as a personal favorite of mine, "Crash Test Dummies" with "Mm Mm Mm." So we don't have much time to talk about those tracks, but you guys got a couple final thoughts on those, David?
Uh, I always really like that Offspring song. I like the cool kind of surf rock guitar riff. It's almost kind of like a kind of Arabic sounding, and of course, Beck's "Loser" is a classic. I guess kind of like a Gen Z or Gen X type anthem. It is surprising to me that was his only top 40 hit, is with as many, or top 40 pop hit with as many singles as he's had over the years.
That's the same thing my wife and I were talking about before coming on was, she goes, that's his only top hit? And I go, yeah, it is. I go, a lot of music. A lot of people love his music, but only, one top 40 hit. Come Out to Play, Offspring, I don't say guilty pleasure anymore. I just say pleasure. But that album, full of hits, great, California pop punk of the time, good songs by intelligent people. They get a bad rap, but I don't hate that album and I don't hate that song.
Yeah, great. Really, really fun stuff, especially, 30 years on. Hearing
Yeah,
all that stuff is it's actually a very not guilty pleasure for me.
right.
But after 1994, the top 40 didn't have any more time for these artists, and sadly, neither do we. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Again, I'm Chris Bisha, editor-in-chief of 360degreesound.com. I'd like to thank Austin Bureau Chief David Hopper for joining us,
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
as well as our guest, 90s expert Phil Childers.
Thanks for having me. I love you guys.
All right. So thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back again soon to talk about music from all angles.